Hello everyone and welcome back to the Sojourning Writer. Today we will be discussing grammar, but first a history lesson. Let's start at the beginning of writing. The Phoenician alphabet, an alphabet known in modern times from the Canaanite and Aramaic inscriptions found across the Mediterranean region, the name comes from the Phoenician civilization. The Phoenician alphabet is also called the early linear script because it is an early development of the Proto or Old Canaanite or Proto-Semitic script into linear, purely alphabetic script. Also, marking the transfer from a multi-directional writing system where a variety of writing directions occurred into regulated horizontal right-to-left script. Its immediate predecessor, the Proto-Canaanite or Old Canaanite or Proto-Semitic script, used in the final stages of the Late Bronze Age, first in either Egypt or Canaan and then Syro-Hittite kingdoms, is the first fully matured alphabet and was derived from Egyptian hieroglyphs. The history of writing has been one that has been studied extensively throughout our history. Currently, there are three forms that were spontaneously developed. First was the Sumerian cuneiform. Second was the Chinese. The third form was in Mesoamerica in the Mayan civilization, though these were mostly destroyed first by the Aztec Empire and finally by the Spanish. Very little remains in this form of writing. We are going to go into more detail about this when we discuss the book Guns, Germs, and Steel. Grammar is the rules of language governing the sounds and words, sentences, and other elements, as well as their combination and interpretation. The word grammar denotes the study of these abstract features or a book presenting these rules. In a restricted sense, the term refers to only the study of sentence and word structure, syntax and morphology, excluding vocabulary and pronunciation. The grammar we use today has been honed over centuries, and it was only after some time after the invention of the printing press that the rules were actually codified. This allows us to have reasonable expectations of the ideas that are being communicated as long as the same rules are being followed. The downfall of grammar. The study of grammatical theory has been an interest to philosophers, anthropologists, psychologists, and literary critics over the centuries. Today, grammar exists in a field within linguistics, but still retains a relationship to those other disciplines. For many people, grammar still refers to the body of rules one must know in order to speak or write correctly. However, for the last quarter of the 20th century, a more sophisticated awareness of grammar issues has taken root, especially in schools. In some countries, such as Australia and the United Kingdom, new English curricula have been devised in which grammar is the focus of investigation, avoiding precepticism of former times and using techniques that promote lively and thoughtful spirit of inquiry. Why is grammar so important? A shared understanding of how to communicate is just as important as knowing what to communicate. As the acceptance of grammar norms are being rejected by certain members of the education profession, as well as others who seek to break down all societal norms, it will become increasingly harder to ensure that the ideas can be effectively shared. Without the ability to properly communicate, we are trapped by our own ignorance. As Frederick Douglass said, education means emancipation. It means light and liberty. It means the uplifting of the soul into a man into the glorious light of truth, the light by which men can only be made free. This is a speech that Frederick Douglass gave. Education is one of those aspects where, if it's properly understood and properly used, it allows those who are being educated to explore ideas of themselves. When we remove standards for grammar and understanding what's being said or what we could understand to be told, we are cutting ourselves off from previous generations of knowledge, of enlightenment. When we do this, we hamper ourselves in the ability to understand what was told to us by the great thinkers of our past. Those that can control the past control the future. As George Orwell said, by removing the ability to properly understand grammar and its rules, we therefore set ourselves up for collapse. Today we live in a world where education is at its highest point of access. Never before has anyone had access to the same level of education that was the separation between the haves and have-nots, the slaves and masters. But after the unmentionable events of 2020, that freedom has been given up. The downfall of education will be the core element of our own destruction. As Ernest Hemingway said, how did you go bankrupt? 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. Gradually, our standards for education has been slipping. But one day, those standards will disappear. And because we have no understanding of what was actually told to us by these people who have written in the past, we will lose that rich heritage, condemning us to slavery by those who do have an understanding. All of this to say is there are a number of resources on the internet that we can use not only to help us improve our own writing, but to assist in helping others. The first is a core book that many people use to help learn grammar when they were still in school. The Blue Book of Grammar and Punctuation. As always, I have a link to where you can find this resource for yourself. This is the outline for the book, and each section goes into details with examples on how to understand each section. This is a great book to use as a reference and a refresher when needed. As grammar is my weakest subject in my own writing, I try to re-educate myself on fundamentals of grammar on a regular basis. This book is just one way to do this. Here's a breakdown of the book, and I will be touching on each chapter. Grammar. Here the book discusses the primary aspects of grammar such as verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and prepositions. There's also a discussion of pronouns and the who versus whom debate, as well as effective writing rules. The second chapter goes into a list of number of confusing words such as ale versus ale, assure versus insure, need versus need versus need. Having this as a reference can be an aid when you don't have access to the internet. Punctuation. The number of punctuation marks are numerable and should be occasionally looked over to make sure you haven't been using them incorrectly, such as comma versus semicolon versus period. Capitalization. This section only has 3 pages, but it should be looked at nonetheless, as capitalization can be confusing on whether or not it applies to the situation. Writing numbers. While this also only has 3 pages, the rules here are a little bit more simple, making it easier to follow. Quizzes. One of the hardest things about grammar is that it's one thing to know the rules, but it's another to put them into practice correctly. Having quizzes allows you to see where you're lacking and review. It doesn't help if you don't know if you're right or wrong while taking a test. Another program I found a long time ago is a website called iExcel. This website is an all-in-one education program that can give immediate feedback for a number of different subjects depending on your plan. With a single subject rate at 79 for the year, to a package with math, language arts, science, and social studies for 159 for the year per child. Every course includes pre-K to 12th grade information. As a note, I'm not being paid for this, but I believe it's always better to have knowledge of more resources that you actually need. I signed up to this website a long time ago so I could practice my grammar skills. If you don't use it for yourself, you might be able to use to supplement your own child's education. Grammar and spell checkers. The top 3 that I found on a number of different websites are Grammarly, ProWritingAid, and Hemmingway Editor. They're typically free versions of each checkers. I would suggest that you fill each one out to see if they are a good fit for you. Personally, I have 2 subscriptions, one to Grammarly and one to ProWritingAid. I will link the website's descriptions so that you can check out the reviews in more depth. Like I said earlier, I'm not being paid for this advertisement for any of these products. I simply just want to give you the tools so you can improve your own writing. Next, we will be looking at all 3 and see how we can use them to improve our writing. So the first one we're going to look at is Grammarly. I've been using Grammarly as my primary grammar and spell checker for quite some time. Here's some of the stuff that I use on a regular basis. They give you a rough overall score where you can kind of see how things are going based on characters, reading time, speaking time, words, sentences, length, sentence length, readability score, which is essentially the French reading ease test. Higher scores indicate that the material is easier to read. Unique words, rare words. This gives you a broad understanding of what's kind of expected from your writing. This can kind of help if you want to get into the nitty-gritty details. It does have generative AI, so just be careful whenever you use this, particularly when you have like writing assignments for college or whatnot, because there have been stories where people have used this program just for grammar and spell checking, and it has popped up as AI written, causing some problems. So until this system gets figured out of what is going to be considered plagiarism when it comes to AI, just be careful in what you use. The next one is ProWritingAid. I've used this occasionally, mostly for a number of the reports that you can get. So you can, for here, this one, you can find potential replacements for nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Commonly identify overused words and phrases, alliteration, homonyms, consistency. This gives you a lot better in-depth of reports. So like word length, sentence length. One of the things that they talk about is making sure that you have a variety of sentence length. Let me see if I can pull up so here's here we take a look at a summary report of the whole thing. And now this is just, a couple hundred words that I threw on here. A lot of the stuff that we're looking at is, the majority of this is, really good, because a lot of this was actually done beforehand. Grammar, spell score, style score, glue index, grammar index, they'll go into pretty good detail of different issues with what's commonly your common issues, so you can help identify those for future. One of the things that you need to be aware of is when you're talking to a spell checker or grammar checker is coming, crying, da. These are words that will show up in your dialogue. If you have anybody who uses any sort of, broken English, these will pop up, these will trigger alerts and whatnot. And there's really no way around that unless you don't have anybody showing, or you don't have anybody actually having those dialogue issues. So just be careful when you do that you're paying attention to, what's being suggested, because sometimes it just undoes some of these artistic elements of your writing. A couple other things that they'll take a look at: they could passive versus active voice, engagement score, emotive tells. You can actually compare your emotion tell breakdowns based off of average for the fantasy. Average, I picked for average for C.S. Lewis, but you can actually change who you want to base it on. Weak adverbs, you want to keep them low. Bad adverb usage, you want to keep it low. Sentence length, you want to keep it pretty good, but you also want to have it varying. You don't really necessarily talk about it, but you always want to make sure that you're changing it up. It makes your writing seem better. Readability, grade 3. So, a lot of this is going to end up being how you want your story to be read. The last one I'm not overly familiar with. I don't typically use this, but this gives you a little bit more specific on adverbs and has its own benefits. This is more of a grammar checker than it is a spell checker. This is a free one, so you have to be a little bit more on point when it comes to your specific expectations. So Hemmingway, while it's a little bit more known as being a free one, and there's free versions of Grammarly and ProWritingAid as well, you just don't get a lot of the same benefits and the same perks and the same reports that you would get for the paid version. So just something you should keep in mind when it comes to how you use grammar and spell checkers. I'm not planning on doing anything as far as a practical this time, because a lot of grammar comes down to practice for each of us. And so paying attention to how you are writing and then figuring out where your shortcomings are and overcoming them is going to be a bigger help than if I show, hey, this is what grammar actually shows and applies to in our writing. So I will be linking all of these websites in the description, and as well I will be any other resources that I use, I will be sure to add those as in the description so that you can have access to as much information as possible. Until next time, have a good one. Bye.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe. Yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go.